He stood beneath the twin suns of Mirren 6, his armor still scarred from the siege that had ended just hours before, the smoke still curling like serpents into the broken sky, and the scent of plasma fire lingering in the air, a reminder of the cost of every inch. Dean, the general's voice was sharp and cold when he was summoned, not as a soldier this time, but as a victor to be honored for his unmatched brutality, his relentless charge through the enemy's last hold fast. And there in the center of the war camp, surrounded by guards and silence, stood the reward offered, not in medals, not in command, but in flesh and breath and eyes, the color of winter storms. The alien woman stood tall, though her wrists were bound in glowing centimetal, her expression unreadable, her skin the shade of starlight, and her presence somehow louder than any weapon he had ever fired. She was not trembling, she did not beg, her gaze met his and held it. And in that gaze he saw not a prisoner, not a prize, but a question, and it sank beneath his skin like a thorn. She was called Virith, a name that was whispered like a forgotten song, a name that belonged to no human tongue, and the general told him she was his now, his to command, his to break, his to use in whatever way pleased him, for such was the law of conquest, and such was the ancient reward of war. But the soldier known only as Halden, the one who never hesitated, the one whose hands had shaped victory, did not reach for her, did not claim her. Instead, he looked at the chains, looked at the silent fury in her eyes, and felt the weight of something heavier than any blade. Halden did not take her to the barracks as expected, nor did he lead her to the tent of war spoils where the other soldiers laughed and drank and forgot their own brokenness beneath the skin. Instead, he walked in silence, her steps matching his, though the chains clinked softly with every movement, and he brought her to the shattered ruin of the old observatory, a place where no one went, where the stars could still be seen between the cracks of fallen stone and ash. He released the force-band from her wrists, the gesture slow, deliberate, almost like an apology, though he spoke no words, and she stood before him, not running, not attacking, simply watching him as though trying to decipher a language without sound. And he finally said, "One thing, only one thing, do you want to be free?" And she laughed, not with joy, not with madness, but with a sharp, raw edge that sliced through the silence like a blade. "You humans always ask the wrong questions," she said, her voice strange and soft like wind through old glass. "I was never yours to own." Her words uncoiled like smoke around him, not angry, but ancient, and in that moment he saw that she was not just a woman, not just an alien captive, but something more, something that shimmered at the edges of what he could understand. And she stepped closer, her gaze no longer guarded, no longer waiting for cruelty, but alive with something more dangerous, hope. She asked him, "What would you risk to undo the chains that bind more than just me?" And Halden felt something crack inside, not pain, not guilt, but something deeper, something that felt like the first breath after drowning. He did not know why he nodded, only that he did, and in that nod a new war began, one without rifles, without orders, a war of choice, a war of soul. Night fell and the camp grew quiet, save for the distant hum of generators and the slow pulse of planetary wind. Halden and Virith stood in the shadow of forgotten ruins, not as captor and captive, but as something else, something unspoken and fragile and dangerous. She told him of her people, of how the chains were forged not from metal, but from fear, from stories told to make them less than, from laws carved in silence and enforced in flame. She told him of the others, the ones still hidden, still waiting, still watching for a sign that not all humans wore cruelty like armor. And Halden listened, really listened for the first time, not as a soldier, but as a man who had seen too much and understood too little. And she asked him again, "What would you risk? Would you fight the ones you once called brothers? Would you bleed for those you were taught to conquer? Would you face the silence of your own name being erased from the records of the righteous?" And Halden said yes, not because he was a hero, not because he sought redemption, but because he saw that doing nothing was also a choice, and he was done choosing silence. So they ran not away, but toward the edge of empire, to the places where fire still burned in secret, and whispers of rebellion took root in shattered soil. And everywhere they went the story followed them, the human who freed the chained, the alien who dared to hope, and in that story others found the courage to stand, to speak, to break, and the chains fell not all at once, not without cost, but they fell, and in the heart of war something new was born, not peace not yet, but the possibility of it. And in that possibility, Halden and Virith walked forward together not as soldier and slave, but as fire and wind, as will and change, as the future. Reaching through the ashes of the past, they came for them in the end, as all empires do their armor. Gleaming with borrowed pride, their orders laced with righteousness and rage, and Halden stood before them not with a rifle, but with resolve, his hand not on a weapon, but on hers, and Virith stood beside him, no longer bound, no longer waiting to be saved, but burning with the light of every name they had set free. The soldiers demanded surrender, demanded silence, demanded that history return to its proper shape, and Halden said no, and Virith echoed him with a voice that cracked the sky, and the battle that followed was not of blood alone, but of will, of every choice made in defiance of the old world, and in the dust of shattered law something shifted, not loudly, not all at once, but like roots breaking through stone, and when the last gun fell silent, the empire did not fall, but it stumbled, and in that stumble there was room for truth to rise. They walked away from the ruins hand in hand, not as fugitives, but as founders, and in the years that follow their story became a signal of fire, passed from world to world, whispered through corridors, and carved into star maps. They did not build a new empire, they built a place where no one knelt in chains, and no one claimed another's breath, and in that place children learned that freedom was not a reward, it was a right, and the memory of chains became a warning, not a weapon. Halden grew older, his body slower, but his fire never dimmed, and Virith, with eyes still like winter storms, stood with him until the stars called him home, and when his final breath came she did not weep. For loss she whispered thank you into the night, and the stars answered not with silence, but with light. And so their names remain not in marble, not in command logs, but in stories that refused to die, the soldier who chose to listen, and the alien who chose to hope, and together they changed everything. The chains were broken, and the future walked free.